Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, home of these aggressive tiger bass. And today we're going to be doing a full tour of our new backyard pond because about 2 months ago we moved away from our old house and said goodbye to the original backyard pond. But thankfully, the new house has an even bigger backyard pond, and today we're going to be doing an in-depth review and seeing how big it is, what supplies the water to it. We're even going to get out in the boat and do a little fishing to see the different types of fish that live in the pond, as well as check in on the wildlife, water quality test, and much, much more. But we're going to start out with a quick tour around the pond because as you can see, it looks a good bit different than the 5-acre pond. And it was built in a U-shape, so it's hard to see the entire pond from any one spot. But I used some overhead mapping to determine the size of the pond, and it came in at 5.23 acres. So we got another 5-acre pond on our hands. But one thing I really like about this pond is it's the polar opposite from the other 5-acre pond in that it's more of a natural pond instead of a clay-lined pond. And one of the biggest benefits of that are trees. You can see the banks are lined with pines and oaks, as well as docks, bushes, shrubs. And then as we get to the back, it narrows down and almost has that small creek feel. But one thing I noticed right here in this back shallow pocket was the bluegill beds, which is a really good sign. You've heard me say it before, bluegills are the backbone of any bass pond. But just above those spawning beds, you'll see that this is also a creek-fed pond, which means you can have a wide variety of fish depending on what's in the body of water upstream. But certain banks also have some vegetation. You can see there's even some cattails mixed in. And one of my favorite features of this pond is the overhanging trees, branches, and brush that make a perfect habitat for fish. But one of the first things I wanted to check out was the spillway system, and this pond has the same vertical standpipe style drain, but I was really confused at first because you can hear that the water is currently overflowing down this drain pipe, and it took a second for me to understand what was going on. So if you look past that debris, you'll notice that there's a second pipe inside the outer pipe, and my guess is that the outer pipe has an opening down in the deeper part of the pond, so the water enters there and then has to travel up and over the top of the inner pipe so it can drain out. I like that design. It helps keep some of that debris from flowing over that outer pipe and creating jams. But one other thing I noticed is there's a lot of small newly hatched fish hanging out right here around the drain pipe. And even though the bottom of the pond appears to be a sandy material, my guess is that that's silt that's washed in over the years. Because over the past couple of months I've noticed this pond has sealed off really good and has maintained that full pool level even through the heat of the summer. And a few months back we installed a fish feeder out on the dock. It's a good way to supplement food for those smaller fish in the pond, and they also typically draw a crowd, and you can see what types of fish live in the pond. And outside of the turtles that kept showing up, there's a pretty healthy population of big bluegills, but we haven't seen any big bass chasing them like we see at the 5-acre pond. But from time to time we do see bass swimming around the dock. Most of these have been small, less than a pound, and a little on the skinny side. And Oliver lured up the biggest bass we've seen yet. While he was tossing marshmallows out to the turtles, you can see maybe a 1.5 to 2 pound bass lurking down there beneath them. But my initial thoughts, after everything I've seen up to this point, is that this is an older pond, maybe 15 to 20 years old, with some really cool wildlife, including this soft-shelled turtle, something we don't see that often around here, as well as an alligator that we first spotted a few weeks back. And as far as we know, there's just one single gator, roughly 5 to 6 feet long, but he has made the pond his home. But there is a big variety of wildlife. You can see the geese and turtles, and it's always a good sign of fish life whenever you have the ospreys flying over. And there's also a big variety of ducks, as well as Mr. Longneck the blue heron. So I set up this outdoor charcuterie board. You guys are going to enjoy seeing what showed up to that later in the video. Alright, so now that we've explored what's above the surface of the water, now it's time to take a look and see what lives beneath. And in order to do that, we had to go get a little John boat. Nobody was happier than my little fishing buddy Oliver. So I didn't want to bring any electronics on this trip, I just wanted to use some old school techniques. For instance, you can throw a weighted jig out and count how many seconds it takes to hit the bottom, and that'll tell you how deep it is. And our deepest parts of the pond were right near the dam, and we had one deep spot about 15 to 18 feet deep. And it didn't take long to start catching some of those smaller bass, and a lot of them were hanging out right beneath those overhanging branches. But what I'm interested in are the relative weights of these fish, because that gives you a good indicator if there's enough food for the population of bass that lives here, or if it's overpopulated. And the first couple were a little on the skinny side, and both under that 100% relative weight. And there's Mr. Alligator in the background, hiding from us. And once I found out where some of the fish were biting, I had to go pick up my sidekick Oliver so he could get in on the action. And it was his first time using a bait caster, but he was ready for it. And although these fish aren't giants, they're the perfect size for him. And if they were any bigger, I think they'd pull the rod in.
Pull him in, pull him out, pull him out. Pull him up, pull him up. He's a big one, ain't he, buddy? Yeah, it's a bass.
Yeah.
Good job, buddy. Yeah, it's a bass, you see?
Yeah.
But he ended up catching the biggest one of the day, and it also had a little bit bigger head and a long, slender body. But since this is creek fed, we wanted to see all the different species in the pond, so we changed our tackle, and he started catching some bluegills.
Look at it, buddy. I think you got one.
No.
He's still on there. Keep reeling. Keep reeling, buddy. You got it. All right, let's see what you got. All right, buddy. Look at there. What do you think?
I'm doing another one.
So overall, just from this one fishing trip, I can tell the pond has a healthy population of fish and could be overpopulated, because even though some of these fish had bigger frames on them, you can see this particular bluegill was a little skinny, which is another sign that there may not be adequate food for the volume of fish that are in the pond. And we caught some more bass that were basically the same, supporting that theory that there's too many fish in the pond competing against each other. But the next thing I wanted to do is test some of the water parameters, and one important parameter is the alkalinity, because that's what determines if you're allowed to get a plankton bloom in the pond, which also tells you which species of forage fish could live in this pond. And this test is pretty simple. You just fill the syringe up with a titration B, and then you slowly start dripping from that syringe into the pond water, and you'll notice that it started out as a green color, but as you add that titration, whenever it turns purple, that indicates your alkalinity in parts per million. And this is about the time that water started turning purple, and if you check the syringe, we're right at 24 parts per million. But that's a key number because anything over 20 parts per million could have a successful plankton bloom. And the reason that matters is because if you're ever going to add bait fish like a threadfin shad, they feed almost primarily on plankton and may not survive long or thrive without it. So just from my first look at the pond, if it was overpopulated and didn't have enough forage fish, while the threadfin shad could be an option, since you don't have that existing plankton bloom, adding a different species like a golden shiner that can survive in clear water might be the better option here. But anytime you ever manage a bass pond, the very first thing you have to ask yourself is, what is the end goal? Because there's pretty much two options. You can either try to raise trophy bass like we do at the Crimson Oak Pond, and have fewer bass with more bait fish. Or the alternative is to have a numbers pond where you have a lot more fish but fewer that can reach that potential trophy size. And my initial thoughts on this is it would be better suited as a numbers pond because it's also in a community, and I've seen a lot of kids out here fishing, and so usually the goal is for everybody to catch fish and have a good time. But now we're back here at the Crimson Oak Pond, one we're much more familiar with. Exhibit A, here we have the largemouth bass. And one of the reasons I've grown to love this fish is because of their unpredictability. As you can see, that school of bass just turned their nose up at a couple of hundred bait fish and passed up a really easy feeding opportunity. While just moments later, a single dragonfly flies over the bass and completely redirects the school. And one of them goes airborne and catches the dragonfly. Man, that's why you have to love a largemouth bass. There's nothing simple about them. And over the years, I feel like I've been pretty fortunate to capture some really cool things on camera. But I also lose a little sleep over some of the things I almost caught on camera. And in almost every scenario, I couldn't get the camera out in time. And every once in a while, I feel like some technology comes out that is a complete game changer. And that's the case with a feature on this new Insta360 Ace Pro 2 camera, because it has a feature called pre-record that can capture from 30 seconds up to 2 minutes before you ever hit the record button. So for example, say I walk up to the pond and Moby jumps out of the water and catches a dragonfly in the air. All I have to do is hit start recording on this camera, and it'll automatically add that time before I hit the record button to the video, which is incredible. But that's also a key feature for any fisherman out there, because now rather than recording all the time, you can just wait until you get the bite, hit record, and the video will include the minutes up to the catch until you stop recording, which cuts down on a ton of video editing. And it even has a chest mount, which is perfect for filming all your fishing and outdoor content. But it also fits into all of my standard accessories, like this dome camera, which allows you to see above the water and below the water surface at the same time. So we've been filming a lot of these acrobatic topwater shots in 8K, which is about as high of resolution as you'll see these days. And this camera really excels in low light situations, so we've even been using it for night lapses to capture these summer moons going across the horizon. So I'll be filming all of my content moving forward with the Ace Pro 2. So for those of you that enjoy filming outdoor content, I'll put a link down in the video description, so do me a favor and go check them out. But as we fly over the Crimson Oak Pond, and you'll notice one of the key differences in the two ponds is out here there's just an abundance of bait fish with threadfin shad, tilapia, golden shiners, and bluegills. And a common question I get asked a lot is, when is this pond going to become self-sustaining where you don't have to keep adding the bait fish? Well, the simple answer is that any small bass pond is never really going to be self-sustainable. You always have to manage these ponds to keep the balance in check, because if not, the bass are going to spawn every year, creating more predators and not enough prey. But there are some ponds out there that have been able to create sustainable bait fish populations. But even if you've always got an abundance of bait, there's never going to be a bass pond that you don't actively have to remove bass out each year to keep those populations in check. But one thing I've been very excited about is our threadfin shad population this year. We had a really good shad spawn, and throughout the pond there's these big dark clouds of shad moving throughout the shallows, which is a good sign because we probably put in around 20,000 of these threadfins this year. I would guess there's probably 50 to 100,000 threadfins in the pond right now. So if you can keep the water conditions right, a threadfin shad is one of those bait fish that can become self-sustaining because each of their spawns produces so many numbers. You can see there's a small school of newly hatched shad, and in a good fertile pond it won't take them long to get big. But the shad aren't the only ones still spawning. Looks like we either have some bluegills or maybe tilapia cleaning off the beds, and just based on their lack of movement, I would guess that these are probably tilapia beds. But if we head over to another part of the pond where we have a shallow road bed, it's also covered in active beds, and you can see some of those bigger bluegills swimming in there. So it's nice to see them still spawning. But my favorite thing about this time of year is no matter which part of the pond you look at, there's going to be some kind of interesting activity going on. We got the big dust clouds up here in this shallow area, meaning that a big school of bass is somewhere nearby. There they are. Didn't take long to find. A school of maybe 20 of them, and it even looks like there's some tilapia mixed in. So let's see what these schoolers are up to today. Still just hammering those banks, picking off the easy targets. But these bass are going to get happy real soon because it's almost time to add the big jumbo prawns into the pond. We've been growing them out since April, and I've been seeing a lot of big adults. So in the upcoming weeks, we're going to start moving them into the 5-acre pond. Not that there's a shortage of food in here for them, but those prawns are a little easier target. So sometimes I watch these clips 2 or 3 times to see if I missed anything. And if you look right where that red arrow is, that's a bigger bass, maybe 4 to 5 pounds. And when it really becomes noticeable is when it swims right next to the school. And you can see it's about twice as wide as those bass next to it. And while it had the perfect opportunity to join the school, you can see it eased off to an ambush point right by the bluegill feeder. And I'm starting to see more and more signs of the big fish doing that. And that just proves our point that that's how they get so big, by burning very little energy and maximizing their food with little effort. And on a different note, one of the things you often hear happening this time of year are pond turnovers and fish kills. And it just happened again a few weeks ago to one of the more popular ponds where they had a complete fish kill. And man, I just hate hearing that. To lose all of your fish in a single event really is tragic. And the only thing that puts my mind at ease and can hopefully prevent that from happening in this pond is our big volcano pump. And I'm telling you, every time I hear one of these stories, I start running it for longer and longer. Earlier this year, it was running from about 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. Then I bumped it up from midnight to 10, but now I think I'm going to run it 24/7 until we get past this fall turnover. All right, now let's head over to one of my favorite places on the farm, the 20,000-gallon waterfall pond we call Cedar Falls. And with the summer heat, the sounds of that waterfall are more and more appealing, but I love it because this pond is thriving right now with all the tropical lilies, aquatic vegetation, but most importantly, happy fish. We got the whole gang right here and everybody's getting along. You can see we're putting some weight on these bass. They've been getting 2,000 shiners added to the pond every week since the spring. Even got the bluegill feeding on the surface there. But check out what I found in the waterfall. It looks like one of the water snakes shed its skin. That's kind of an interesting spot for them to do it. But that's not all. Look what else I found over here in the waterfall. One of the big jumbo prawns has molted and gotten rid of its outer shell. My guess is that's probably one that was up in the wetland filter. But those guys are getting big. It won't be long now. And I love turtles, but I'm not too happy with this guy because he's been doing a number on the tropical lilies. He bites them off at the base of the stem, and then most of the time doesn't even eat them. You can see he's taking a chunk out of that one right there above him too. And there's a good look at a healthy tilapia. Big shout out to them. They've been working overtime keeping the pond clean. But it's feeding time. Let's get some underwater shots with the Insta360 Ace Pro 2. But you know, this smaller pond is a perfect example, because after we first built it, I just had a few bass in here, and I can remember we would add 1,000 golden shiners, and sometimes I could go 2 weeks in between feeding. But one thing led to another, and we had 2 successful spawns. And I don't know, now we probably got 8 to 10 bass in here. And these bass can easily knock out 2,000 shiners in 1 week. And they had another successful spawn this year, as we're seeing little baby bass frying here. So you could see how things could get out of hand really quick. Because if I didn't remove some of these bass, next year I may have to add 3,000 shiners. But on a pond of this small scale, it's controllable, because we're just talking about the addition of 2 to 3 fish. But in the 5-acre pond, you may have 200 new bass after a successful spawn, and that's why if you're not removing enough fish out each year, and after talking to the biologists, that's the #1 mistake that pond owners make, is they don't harvest enough fish. So if you have a pond, a good rule of thumb is to harvest anywhere between 10 to 20 pounds of bass per acre. And our management plan is to do 20 pounds per acre, because we want to give fewer bass the ability to grow really big. But if your goal is to just catch fish and always get bites when you go fishing, then you may only want to pull out 10 pounds per year. But no matter which route you choose, it's always good to get relative weights, because that's the best indicator that'll let you know if you're overpopulated or if the bass don't have adequate food. But the beauty is that if you catch these problems in time, they're fixable, but if you neglect a pond for years, there's almost no coming back. I love watching these bass after a feeding. They get so full they can barely open their mouth to let another one swim in. But man, look at how big they're getting. And that's Tiger. That's one of the first bass we caught out of the 5-acre pond, and even raised him in an aquarium for a year before he made it to this pond. And he's just as happy as can be. But we can't forget about our smallest bass that we call Truman. He's up here in the wetland filter, and I'd also say it's thriving this time of year. It's completely covered in tropical lilies, and that's what we prefer because it's such a shallow body of water. We don't want the blue herons or birds picking off Truman. But one of the things I wanted to do is put some bacon down in the water to lure some of these big prawns out. But like always, the first one I lured out was Truman. And man, he's getting big. Every time I feed the bass down in Cedar Falls, I bring about 20 of the shiners up here and dump them in. And between those and the few prawns he catches, you can see he's been eating good. He's a thick boy, but it looks like the camera died before I got any of the prawns in action. I'll try to get them in the next video. But here's one of my favorite animals out here on the farm, and it's the fox squirrel that we call Foxy. And this little guy's been around since the start of the pond build, but I hate it because we hadn't been seeing him very often. We may go a few months in between each sighting, but it's almost like he recognizes me because he's coming towards me rather than going away. That's how I always know it's him. And once he gets right up here and says hey, I can almost guarantee you he's going to do a Lambo leap into the trees. Wait for it. There it is. He came up a little short. Good to see you, Foxy. And we got some more exciting news. We had our first fawn of the year. Man, look at all the spots. But this one's interesting because 2 years ago we had triplets. Last year we had twins. And this year it's a single. But this little guy's hopping along, staying real close to mama, learning the ins and outs of the farm. And it's no surprise the ospreys are still hanging around. You can see from those earlier drone shots, they shouldn't have a problem catching a fish at all. But believe it or not, they can be picky. And some more good news, one of the adult bald eagles made it back this week. And they left the farm after they got done nesting back during the spring. And usually they don't come back until the winter time. And my guess is to avoid all of this heat. But we saw one of the babies last week, and now one of the adults is back. Always happy to see them. Alright, me and my little buddy Oliver on a mission today. We're going to build an outdoor charcuterie board for the wildlife, and the boss man's doing a fine job at getting everything in place. And he's even wearing his safety glasses. Gotta love it. And we decided to install it right over here on the edge of the pond, and the goal is to attract as many different species as possible. So we've got bird seed, sunflower seeds, peanuts. Liz even got us some fresh jelly, some oranges, and a bird snack ball. Now let's see who decides to show up. Now what I'm interested in seeing is the reaction of anything that shows up, because you can only imagine if you're out in the wild having to hunt and find food every day, and then all of a sudden there's this big buffet table. It's got to be pretty exciting. But now the party's here. So folks, I've been watching this squirrel for the past couple of weeks, and this little guy has some personality. But he started out eating some bird seed, maybe some sunflower seeds mixed in, and then he had to come back for some more, and he decided to try out a peanut, and this is probably the first peanut he's ever eaten, and he decided that was too much work. Tossed it aside to try something else. But he literally saw it as a buffet table and sat there all day and ate and ate and ate. I think his favorite were the sunflower seeds and the bird seed. And just when I thought he was finally going to leave and open up the table for some different wildlife to show up, he decided to come back, and I think he had gained so much weight he could barely get back up on the table. But we had another unexpected visitor. I wasn't expecting the crows to show up. He's looking around, weighing his options, and then decided to snag one orange and got out of there. And wouldn't you know it, our little squirrel friend is back for round 3. At this point, I'm starting to get worried about his health, and he's going to need some exercise after all of this. But I'd like for you all to help me name this guy because, like I said, he's got some personality. We also installed a nut bar earlier this week, and you can see he even hops up and encloses himself in it while he eats and just pokes his head out. That's a funny sight right there. But leave your comments down below on what you think we ought to name the new squirrel. And I'll have to say this has probably been one of the rainiest summers since we built the pond. And I'm not complaining because it keeps us from having to pump well water into the pond. But like Forrest would say, this was that sideways rain. And it filled the pond up in a hurry. You can see we're right there, maybe 1/4 of an inch away from going over the spillway pipe. That's about as full as it can get. So now let's check on the other squirrel house that we have here at the farm. And every once in a while I'll stop by to clean the house out and replace the camera batteries. But look who was inside this time when I came by. It's Gus Gus the mouse. And for 10 minutes I sat here waiting on him to hop out. But he was determined not to leave out of his house. But I didn't want to scare the poor guy when I opened up the lid. So I used a stick and tried to nudge him out. And even then he didn't want to leave. But eventually he made a run for it. And the first one to show back up was a salamander or a skink. And later that night, Gus Gus showed back up, checking out the new arrangements in his house. He had brought a lot of sticks in and I had to do a little clean out. And I'm not too sure he's happy about it. And not long after that, little Gus Jr. stopping by, then giving himself a bath. But it's a good thing they didn't stay around overnight because the next morning, Mr. Kitten showed up. And I don't think Gus or Gus Jr. want anything to do with this one. But like every other animal, they have to come inside the house to inspect it. And I'm sure with his little whiskers, he can smell that the mice have been here recently. So he decides to cover the entrance and turn it into a waiting game. And then we also have another cat bath. But whenever he heard some thunder from an incoming storm, he decided to come in and take shelter. And that's where he laid and continued to bathe. And once he got clean, you knew it was only a matter of time, because there's nothing better to do on a rainy day than take a good cat nap. Alright, let's catch a few of these bass and use this pit tag scanner to see how big they've gotten. We're going to go old school today with this bubblegum trick worm. When I was a kid, you could have dropped me off at any farm pond, and I felt like I could catch every fish in the pond with this. So let's see if these bass in the Crimson Oak Pond like the bubblegum color. Alright, we got the Ace Pro 2 mounted on the chesty. Let's see how it does with some fishing content. There we go. Got him. Ooh, big fish. Look at that on the bubblegum worm. Man, that's a nice one. Look at that. Man, what a good looking fish. Nice and healthy. Definitely what you want to see there. Man, gotta love it. Alright, this fish has been caught. Its tag is 33963. 4.34 pounds. You gotta love it when the old school tricks work on these new bass. Keep on growing. Alright, now this big guy's named Ace and has almost gained 3/4 of a pound since we caught it last in May. But Ace gives us a really good picture on the importance of bait fish. So we caught Ace in May and September of 24, and we also caught him in May and August of 2025. And in 2024, he actually lost weight from May to September, and that's when we were struggling with our threadfin shad populations, and also had some water quality issues. But it's amazing to me that after you get those things corrected, the potential that a fish like this has in growth spurts to gain that much weight in such a little amount of time when all the conditions are just right. There's nothing that special about it. It just resembles an earthworm and has some really good action on it. There we go. Got him. It was tough to beat it. Another big one. Look at that. The bubblegum worm.
Another solid fish. All right, this one's been caught. 5'6", 9589, weighing in at 3.13 pounds.
All right, this fish is named Xena, and it's safe to say that Xena lives right in front of the big feeder, and she's also doing good and gaining weight each time we catch her.
Yes. Another good one. Look at that. I see some tilapia right beneath them right there. They're eating the worms up. There we go. Good one. All right, this fish has been caught. 570371, weighing in at 2.57 pounds.
And this fish is named the Reaper, and the Reaper will pretty much eat any bait that you toss out in front of him. He is not picky at all.
Here's one. Got him. Another nice one. Come on in here. There we go. Another solid fish. All right, this one's been caught. 570496, weighing in at 2.77 pounds.
And this fish is named Yeti, and another interesting fish. So the last time we caught Yeti was 2 years ago, back in 2023. And this is one of those original 2-inch bass that we stocked in the pond, and one of those that I had kind of thought didn't survive because it had been so long since we had seen it. But that just goes to show you, you never really know what's swimming around down there.
There we go. Got him. Little guy right up there hanging out around the dock. This little one probably has not been caught before. It has not. It's a new fish, probably from the last spawn. All right, I just put a new tag in him. It's 2232569, and he weighs 1.03 pounds.
All right, we're over here at Liz's garden, and since she wasn't using this last planter, she was nice enough to let us turn it into a worm bed. And I thought this was a good idea because now that the kids are getting more involved in fishing, it's a great way to always have some fresh bait for them right here at the farm. So we're going to add a couple of different species, starting out with the big old earthworms. And there's some big boys in there. And then next up we're going to add some red worms. And I did this same thing when I was a kid. Every time I went fishing and had some worms left over, I'd dump them in the same spot. And after just a few trips, I had a good self-sustaining worm bed, never had to go buy bait again. Alright, now let's see what's going on in Bonnie's Bayou. You can tell how hot it is by some of those egrets over there on the right, sitting down in the water. I don't think I've seen that one before. Mr. Longneck using the duckhouse to try to sneak up on a fish. Here he is in stealth mode again. Look at his neck curled up in that S shape, trying to hide his big shadow. So the wildlife doesn't know what to think since we've gotten all this rain and some of that swamp area is flooded. Little old buck deer coming through, getting his feet muddy. And I always find it amazing how quickly a coyote picks up on these trail cameras. Man, that's a big armadillo. And there's a little young buck deer in velvet. And he came back a couple days later when it seemed like most of the rain had dried up. But most of the bucks are still in velvet, traveling around in bachelor groups. And we're getting a big population of raccoons. 2 of those babies are new from this year, and they don't always get along. And hey, look at there, that's the doe we call Flip Flop, pushing one of those spikes away so it can get into the food. And we got some more bucks in velvet showing up, but one thing I really like about this time of year, their antlers are big enough now that we can recognize some of the deer from last year. They have the same characteristics, so it's always interesting to see which deer survived and have stayed right here around the farm. Man, that is a lot of raccoons. Alright, if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with all of our ponds, wildlife, and aggressive tiger bass. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.